We're in week number 5 of our series, Advent series, and it's coming near the end. We're almost done with this. And today we're going to talk about the searching wise men, the searching magi. And I think this is a really interesting thing. These people in the Bible are so mysterious to me. They almost don't fit the storyline. I don't know about you all. I've always been really curious about these individuals. We don't know a lot about them. There's not a lot written about them in Scripture, and they don't seem to fit the text all that well. It almost feels like, anybody here, the Chronicles of Narnia? Any Narnia fans, C.S. Lewis Narnia fans? It almost feels like Santa Claus showing up in the Chronicles of Narnia. You're like, what is he doing here? It almost feels like it doesn't fit. And when I've looked through this, and I've read the Scripture, and I've studied these guys over and over again, over the different years, over the years kind of going through this, read different commentators on them, I find them ever more increasingly interesting. The human puzzle. I think to really get a picture of who they are, we need to look inside of us just for a moment, a brief moment. All through history, humanity has been experimenting, okay? We've all been experimenting. You do this too, whether you realize it or not. You experiment with love, you experiment with pleasure, you experiment with the world around you, you experiment, humanity has done this even with social order. From Marxism to the American dream, humanity has spent most of its time on this planet trying to mix things together to get it just right. The problem is, nobody knows what just right actually looks like in culture as a whole. Now, we will say things, I almost can't even watch beauty pageants anymore. And I know the last one was pretty funny because they crowned the wrong queen. Is that what that would be, the wrong queen? And so I did go back and I watched that little part because I was curious about it. But I don't really watch beauty pageant stuff anymore at all. I just get really bothered by it, especially when the ladies are doing their speeches and, world peace, what do you want? World peace. We have these phrases that we throw out there, but nobody exactly knows what world peace looks like. And for each cultural group, it's going to be a little bit different. World peace for global Islam looks very different than what we would want world peace to look like in most of America. Do you get it? World peace for the greater Christian movement looks very different than what a lot of America would like world peace to look like. Do you see the difference? And so even within humanity as a whole, we don't know what right looks like, but we're all in hot pursuit of it. Even in all my years of doing ministry as a pastor and counseling, it's interesting to come across people, even in marriages, they can't agree on what a right home looks like. I was counseling with a married couple, this has maybe been 7 or 8 years ago now, and they had gotten married, and usually what people do when they fall in love and get married, especially here in the States, is it's visual attraction kind of drives everything. So you look at somebody, you're going, whoo, right? And you lock on, you love what you see, they like you like them, you get connected, you begin the relationship, and then you go through and you get married. And then after you're married, you start asking questions that you should have asked before you got married. And this was the same way. So they're sitting down in my office, and I've actually had this happen maybe 15 times or more since I've been doing ministry, where they get married, and after they get married, they start talking about, do they want children? One of them did, one of them did not. I've seen this happen many times in ministry as a pastor counselor. And so I'm having this conversation. They'd been married for maybe 15 years, 16 years, somewhere in there. And he was starting to feel like if we're going to have kids, we really need to start down this road. And she's going, I don't think I want to do this at all. So they end up in my office. And it was so interesting, even in that conversation, the perfect marriage for her looked very different than the perfect marriage for him. He wanted little ones running around and taking a little boy hunting. That was a big thing for him. He loved to hunt. So take a little boy hunting and teach him what it's like to be a man. And for her, it was about a clean home that's well ordered and all taken care of. And so even in Christian homes, right is very different. I read an article a while back, and it was talking about, actually very interesting. I tried to find it, and I couldn't find it. I wanted to share the reference with you this morning, but I couldn't find it. And it was an interview with Islamic women, American Islamic women. So not the radicals overseas, but, people, her husband was a doctor and they did really well and they had lived in a really nice neighborhood, but they were devout Muslims. And she was talking about how she felt so free from the burdens that our American culture puts on women. She said that. And I was reading through the article, and she was saying things like, most Americans, this is like her little interview as they were talking with her, most American women feel all this weight to have to look a certain way. They've got to wear all these different kinds of clothes. They've got like all this weight that American women have to feel. And she said, it's so nice to be free from that. And all I have to do is put my little head thing on and go about my life. She felt freed from the very thing that you wanted to get free from old culture to be. Do you see it? And as I was reading through there, I thought, wow, so interesting. Nobody knows what right is, but everybody's desperately experimenting to try to figure out what it looks like. Dr. Peter Gray, maybe you've read some of his work. He's written a number of books. He is a research professor at Boston College, and he says this. This is really interesting. I don't think he's a Christian guy at all. I don't know for sure. But in his research and work, I've never come across anything that would imply that he is a deist of any type or believes in a God of any kind. He says this, he says, one thing we know about anxiety and depression, this research professor at Boston College, one thing we know about anxiety and depression is that it correlates significantly with people's sense of control or lack of control over their own lives. Now, okay, hang on this for just a moment. Think about it. Anxiety and depression, he knows. Okay, so for a research professor to say he knows something means that it's not just subjective, but he objectively has done some type of research to come to this conclusion, okay? Anxiety and depression is that they correlate significantly with people's sense of control or lack of control over their own lives. People who believe that they are in charge of their own fate are less likely to become anxious or depressed than those who believe that they are victims of circumstances beyond their control. All right, now do you see the assumption that he's making? The more I feel that I am free to experiment with the life that I want, the more complete I am going to feel. That's his assumption. That's the assumption that most of us make. That if you are free in your job to experiment with the type of life that you want at work, in a marriage, at home, with your children, if you can experiment, the more freedom you have to experiment, the more we are going to enjoy the life that we have. That's the assumption that most of us make. But listen to his research. You might think that the sense of personal control would have increased over the last decades. Real progress, and this is him, he continues, real progress has occurred in our ability to prevent and treat disease. The old prejudices that are limited to people's, that have limited people's options because of race, gender, or sexual orientation have diminished. This is his research continuing. And the average person is wealthier than in past decades. All right, now listen to this next sentence of his. Yet, the data indicates that young people's belief that they have control over their own destinies has declined sharply over the decades. Right, so hang on just a moment. You have more freedom to experiment with more things, and you are less happy. You're less satisfied. There's less prejudices to staying faithful within a marriage and not experimenting outside. There's less boundaries that have locked people into certain roles within society. You can experiment more and more. And objectively, not subjectively, he says the data is clear. People as a whole are increasing in anxiety and depression, not decreasing in it. What do you do with that? Actually, if you ever get a chance to read through his research, it's really interesting as he tries to draw conclusions from pursuing the road that he thought, and most think that all Americans want, and it's not bringing them to the end that he thought it would bring them to. Do you see it? Increased experimentation, increased searching, and yet the void of me feeling whole grows broader and broader and broader. The void grows. People unsatisfied with their jobs, people trying to work out their sexual desires, single people longing to be married, married people totally unsatisfied with their marriages and wanting to try a different one. Students trying to fit in with their peers, drunks and addicts looking to fill a void that nothing and nothing and nothing is working. So man experiments on. This searching isn't new. All right, so let's go back in time. We have a little picture of where we are today, the constant searching, the constant longing, the constant trying of new things, trying to feel whole. Let's go back in time, all the way back to the birth of Christ. The wise men. Matthew 2, 1 through 6. Now after Jesus was born, we're going to start here. Matthew 2, 1 through 6. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, the wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born king of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled. He was troubled. Now note some of these words. Herod was troubled when these people show up on the scene, the wise men do. And all of Jerusalem with him. Everybody's nervous when these guys show up. Note that. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea. So it is written by the prophet, And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. All right, let's look at a few of the major players in this little narrative in history. Jesus. At this time, Jesus is probably closer to 2 years old. Herod. Herod is a great ruler, at least in the early part of his life. In fact, I love the way this is written by the Faith Life Study Bible. It says, Herod the Great ruled Palestine on behalf of Rome. The first 24 years of Herod's reign were successful. He established peace throughout the land. He made the temple more magnificent than that of Solomon. He provided jobs for the working class and completed a number of building projects throughout his territory. His final 9 years as king were less glorious and led to the New Testament description of him as a tyrant. These years were characterized by political intrigue, executions, familial disputes, war, clashes with Rome, and he died dishonorably and was succeeded by his son. So you have Jesus and you have Herod, who in these latter days of his life is kind of going nuts. And then you have these wise men show up on the scene. These individuals are one of the Bible's greatest mysteries. Again, I feel as awkward as I did the first time Santa Claus showed up in the Chronicles of Narnia. You're like, what's he doing here? Who exactly was this? Were they? Where did they come from? Where did they go? Did they leave believing in Jesus? They were most likely royal wise men from the east. They were most likely very well educated for their day, especially in astrology. They probably came in large number with servants. They brought 3 gifts, but there were most likely more than 3 wise men. The gifts were very expensive. I know for me as a kid, when you would see the Christmas nativity played out and the wise men, the 3 wise men giving gifts, I would often in my mind think of a gift. Maybe their gifts would have been like big Christmas gifts, like $150, $200, $300, whatever. But as I've read through a lot of this, these wise men probably gave gifts of great significance, like they gave Jesus a fortune. One commentator said that it's not unlikely that even the traveling that Mary and Joseph did to run from Herod's persecution was all funded by these gifts. I mean, imagine somebody showing up and not giving you like a new watch for Christmas, but one of them walking in and going, here's enough money to fund the next 10 years of your life. The next one walking in and going, here's enough money to fund the following 10 years of your life. I mean, these are great gifts of great significance. Again, we don't know for sure. The 3 gifts, but they were most likely more than that. The gifts were very expensive. They could have been students of some of David's, the wise men, could have been students of some of Daniel's work that we have no knowledge of from the Hebrew time of exile hundreds of years prior. Did they return home believing in Jesus or teaching about him? We don't know. I'm always curious about that. So these wise men show up on the scene. They see Jesus. They acknowledge him as king. They acknowledge him as being Lord. And then they disappear. I mean, what theology emerged from back home with them? Did they go back home proclaiming Jesus as the hope? I don't know. So we have these players, Jesus, the wise men, and Herod. Let's look at the event really quick. The arrival of the wise men. So let's look at this, what actually happened. They were so strong in number, and apparent power that everyone, including Herod, took notice. Now, I'm no true biblical scholar, right? I don't have a PhD in biblical history yet. I may one day, I don't know. But I right now, man, so I'm still kind of a novice learning this. But I absolutely can guarantee pretty safely that if just 3 random people were to walk into the community, Herod wouldn't have noticed at all or even cared. I am pretty certain that Herod had enough power and influence that for these people to walk in and make him nervous, and all of the community, that these people walked in with great numbers and great power. The Pharisees in verse 2 have come to worship him. This is the same language, an original language. It's the same type of language that would have been used for worship of deity or royalty. Okay, so now in your mind, picture this. These people show up. Herod is nervous. The whole community is nervous. They walk in with great number and visit Herod. And when they walk into Herod, it's, we have come to see this new king child. So they tell the one who's in control that basically you're not it and we're here to see who it really is. Now, Herod, man, especially in his latter years, any time that his throne, his power was under any type of it trying to be hit, trying to be taken out, he would kill people, his own children. And these people show up, threaten his power, and he still is afraid and nervous. I want to take a moment, I want to think about this. A group of people show up with so much money, overwhelming presence, that the king was nervous. They then tell him that they have come to worship a new king. Herod is so frightened and threatened, he kills all the baby boys under 2 in Bethlehem. I was trying to think of a good way to maybe illustrate this in our modern minds. I want you to imagine that the president was to come to your neighborhood to visit your neighbor. Like in my little neighborhood. So I want you to imagine like helicopters fly into my little cul-de-sac. Helicopter lands in the middle of it. This huge entourage of vehicles and police cars and lights go up and they block traffic, and then they show up at my neighbor's house. I mean, we're all going to know this is going down. This is more likely what it was like when the wise men showed up to see Jesus. Let's continue. Matthew 2, 7 through 12. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly, and ascertaining from them what time the star had appeared, he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child." I love that he's buddying up with them. "And when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him." After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, a star that they had seen, when it rose, went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary and his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. Then, opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed from their own country by another route. Notice that God speaks to these wise men, and they obey him. They obey him. A couple of final thoughts. And I'm going to take a few moments here and work through this. Man is searching. I mean, we are all searching at some level. Some of us look hard without, some of us read books and look deep within, but we're all searching. We're trying to figure out this life. We're trying to figure out what's going to make us happy. I mean, there are single people now that I've met with that are fully convinced that marriage is going to make them happy and complete and whole. And the only thing that makes me nervous is putting the weight of their completeness on a spouse is a really, really awful weight to carry. There are people now, you are fully convinced that if you get a new job, you're going to be complete. And we are constantly on the hunt trying to find that right mixture of my experimentation to get this together where I feel fully complete and whole. We're continuing the same searching that's been going on since the beginning of humanity, or at least the fall of humanity. And these brilliant wise men, highly influential, really wealthy, in their searching for what is right, at a great distance, traveled a long ways, hoping to find completion too. This is nothing new. It's nothing new. What would you give? I mean, would you give if you knew you could be made whole? How far would you travel if you knew you could find that true peace? How far would you go? What would you be willing to let go of? N.T. Wright, brilliant Anglican scholar and author, he says it like this searching. N.T. Wright said it is more than a searching for a thing. He said it's more like learning a language. It's like people are trying to speak. This language was spoken by Christ, and it is the language of heaven, the language of perfect love, fully known and fully understood and fully chosen. That is it. That's what we are trying to figure out, is how to be fully known, fully understood, and still fully chosen. And you are on the hunt for this, to be fully known, fully understood, and fully chosen. N.T. Wright says it like this. He says, many people in the world can speak only their mother tongue. It is the only language they've ever learned, and they learned it without reflecting on how they did. Even that makes the point, because as we learn our mother tongue, whatever it is, we are building up a massive and highly complex network of habits, both mental and physical, which interrelate in multiple ways with different life situations. When Jesus shows up on the scene, everybody's asking him, how do I find eternal life? That's the question. It's the same question, maybe worded a little differently, that you may be wrestling with today. How do I find that right completion? How do I be made whole? And Jesus' response over and over and over again is simply this. He says, follow me. And like a little kid learning a language, my kids watch me interact. I was driving down the road yesterday with Noah, my oldest, and I was just singing Christmas songs in the car, and I stopped for a moment, and I looked over and I noticed that he was mirroring me, and then he started singing the same Christmas songs that I was singing. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting? Like, he's just doing what I do. That's how he's learning how to interact with the world. Little kids do this. And when Jesus says, follow me, he's saying you are going to learn, I love the way N.T. Wright puts it, you are going to learn the language of heaven. See, with all of my interest in these wise men that show up, think about this for just a moment. You got to lock this in. These are brilliant people who are very curious about Jesus and absolutely respect him. But instead of following him, as we know, what do? They go away. That's maybe my only point of contention. And again, that's speculative. We don't know for sure. But the wise men show up, these brilliant people. They come to Jesus. They acknowledge him as having power and influence. They give him great gifts. They applaud Christ. I mean, it's almost like being a huge fan of the Colts. So they show up, they buy the best seats, they applaud the team, but they go home. They don't learn to be a football player. They go home. And see, for you may show up on a Sunday, you may listen in on a radio station, you're curious about Jesus, you applaud him, you maybe even give money to help good things happen. But until you are actually following Jesus, you're not really learning the language of heaven yet. So then this begs the question, what does follow Jesus actually mean? I mean, you got to learn the language. The wholeness is in knowing that Jesus lived on the planet. The wholeness is in following him. You learn that language. There are really three meta themes in Scripture that stand out. You commit to making corporate worship a priority, right? So let's use this same metaphor. Corporate worship, do not forsake the gathering of believers, as some are in the habit of doing. You make time to come together and worship God. Think of this as like going to Spanish class, right? You want to learn Spanish. You want to move somewhere where it's spoken. You're going to show up to class. You're going to go to a classroom. The teacher's going to teach, and you're going to soak it in. That's one of the ways we follow. The second one is this, especially as adults learning this language. The second thing that we do is this. We make a commitment to small groups, a place where you're gathering with other people that are also learning the language, and you practice. You practice the language of heaven on each other in a small group. Now, what does that look like? You pray together. You right now may go, I don't want to pray in public. Like, I don't even pray with my family. You may be a Christian that just, for whatever reason, internally you've decided, I don't need to pray. I'm going to let my wife do that, or I'm going to let my husband do that. I don't want to do it. You need a place to practice. You've learned the truths. Now you need a place to practice the truths with other believers. And so in a small group, you go, you know what? Maybe even with a small group, you go, I want to pray tonight. Whenever we come to an end, I need to practice this. You practice the language. When you walk in a small group, so let's say you've had a horrible, awful headache all day long, and you got small group that night. That's perfect. Yeah, it's perfect. Because you show up at your small group having had a bad day, and you practice being Jesus over the frustration. Now, you can still even tell them, I've had a headache all day, and I'm really miserable, but I got to tell you, right now, I am doing my best to honor God, even in this frustrating situation. You practice it. Jesus spoke to Latin crowds, and he drew them into smaller groups. And in smaller groups, they had lots of conversation trying to understand the deeper things and practice them. That's the second thing. Then there's a third thing that comes with actually following Jesus. Not like the wise men who show up and cheer him on, give a little money, and then go about their own life, but actually following Jesus, learning the language. The third thing is this. You go and serve. You go and do. As you learn it and you figure it out and practice it, then you commit to go and actually being the love of light and speaking the language to the natives who need to hear it. This is the method that Jesus used to teach the language of heaven to people. It's more than just knowing that he existed. It's more than being a fan of Jesus. It's more than just giving money once in a while and walking away. It's following him. That's the difference. Okay, so today, I'm going to let you go in about 2 minutes. You are searching. Everybody is. At some level, you're searching. Looking to find that completion. You're looking for it in another person. You're looking for it in a type of pleasure. You're looking for it in identity or power or influence. You're looking for it in being respected at work or at home. You're looking for it. And you show up in church and you say, man, I just want Jesus. Or you even applaud him, maybe even give a little money. And Jesus whispers from thousands of years ago the same statement. He says, follow me. Follow me. The mission statement of our church is this. Love God, love one another, and help others know and love God. That's the mission statement of our church. Now, this is interesting. Most churches I've come across have a mission statement that says, love God, love others. But I think there is void. There's disconnect in that. It's not complete. It's love God, love one another, and then help others know and love God. That's it. Our mission statement is based on that deep theology. Follow Jesus. As we close out this morning, it's the week after Christmas, the Sunday where attendance is usually down, everybody's really tired, we're all in recovery mode, right? My prayer is that as you get ready to begin this next year, it's coming fast, that you would make the primary commitment in your life following Jesus. Commit. Commit to worship. Commit to a small group where you can learn this laterally to the best of your ability. I get that there are seasons that that's hard to do. I mean, you may be on the road a ton because of work and it's not your fault. But to the best of your ability, try to commit to worship, commit to a small group, and commit to serving somewhere. And begin to not just be a fan of Jesus, not just give stuff away once in a while and walk out the door and disappear into history like the wise men did, but to actually follow Jesus, to learn the language of heaven. And as you learn this language, you then know what it's like to begin to understand what it's like to be known, to be loved, and to offer love from the person who designed you.